So remember those clown incidents during 2016, where clowns would go around scaring people all over the US? Well, me and my group of friends were some of those people. I'm the first to admit we are scumbags. However, I learned from this experience and I am far from a monster. I had many weird things happen to me while clowning, as we called it. One of those things was meeting this guy we referred to as Shaco, named after the League of Legends character. A bit of context, I lived in Texas with this same group of friends. We spent that whole month traveling around most of the state, going to various smaller areas to spook people while avoiding police attention. During one of these runs is when we met Shaco at Marble Falls. Shaco was dressed more as a jester than a clown. Hat with bells on the side, really colorful and puffy outfit, with a masquerade mask over his face which was painted gold in color. During our clowning runs, we actually met other clowns before, so we went to talk to him, 'cause even if we were all dressed as clowns, we are still human beings. Couldn't hurt maybe to make a friend during this little prank, or so we guessed. Shaco was hiding close by in a spot near the lakes. I couldn't see his eyes, yet I noticed him staring at a few people playing by the water. Judging by where his head was pointed towards, I assumed it was a small get-together. We talked to him and everything was semi-normal for the situation. He didn't act normal though. The lot of us figured he was just hardcore into acting. Trust me, one of the other clowns we met before did the same thing. This guy acted like a madman straight from a horror novel, which didn't mess with me at all. I thought he would be fun to tag along with. So when he started asking us to follow him, no one refused. It was a large group of us, with one single guy leading them towards the lake. So nothing happened to any of us, at least. Going down this path, we spotted two guys that seemed to be a couple, judging by how they held hands and how close they were to each other. They were talking loudly, which is probably why they didn't notice us till Shaco made his first move. This guy reached up into his hat and pulled out a knife. I kid you not, this guy pulled out a knife like it was nothing. I wasn't expecting it. Most of the other clowns I meet didn't try to hurt people. They just scared people at most, just like us. Yet seeing this guy with a knife caused me to hesitate. I looked at my mates who were all freaking out silently. Like I said, we're not saints, but we didn't want to hurt anyone during this little prank. The two guys kept going, not noticing Shaco charging them till it was too late. Both of them naturally started to scream. Despite this, and obviously feeling terrified, me and my buds decided to cut them off and surround them. I guess, due to us being a-holes and not believing someone would actually get hurt, we felt the need to continue the horror. Now, our group of friends are literally a dozen guys and 2 girls. Adding Shaco made it 15 versus 2. There was no way they would get away once we got them in a circle. Once trapped by all of us, Shaco came in and then started screaming at the top of his lungs while saying weird things to one of the guys in particular.
"Darling, did you miss me? My sweet Eggo waffle, did you miss my morning light? I miss you, my dusk. I want you back."
He kept going on and on after this. My friends all had mixed feelings about this situation. Some of them were laughing, enjoying how afraid these 2 dudes were. The rest of us, well, bad vibes hit us hard. What changed this whole situation, though, and where things got 100% real, was when Shaco went close to this guy, a blonde male I'll call Jeff.
"Be mine. Be my king, and I'll be your fool. Or I'll make you disappear in your little knight in shining armor."
Shaco then put the knife close to Jeff's face. The second guy, a redhead I'll call Max, stood there balling up his fist, tears streaming from his eyes watching the mad jester getting so close to his boyfriend. Well, we may be terrible, but none of us, however, were heartless. The 2 largest guys in my group basically grabbed Shaco from behind. Both of them were about 6'2". Shaco tried to fight them off, but one of my female friends and I grabbed his feet. The couple stood there stunned, seeing us turn on Shaco when my mate Drew told them in his thick Australian accent, "Listen, we came here only for thrills, not to kill anyone, dudes. Just get out of here. Run away and call the cops, please." The moment those words left my bud Drew's mouth, they booked it back to whatever camp they had just left, leaving us with the now screaming Shaco cursing us and threatening to slit all our throats. None of us were afraid, however. Again, it was 14 of us versus him. So we tossed that madman into the lake and ran off. We got into our cars and drove away from that spot. We didn't know what happened to Shaco or the two guys until recently. You see, what made me write this story was that me and my friends all went to the hookah bar near my house this weekend. Drew was telling us some story about how he lost his favorite baseball when some guy with red hair came and said, "Hey guys, did you go to Lake Marble during Halloween? During the clown crap?" Apparently through fate, we ran into Max. He and Jeff were, in fact, a gay couple who had been stalked by Jeff's ex-boyfriend, aka, you guessed it, Shaco. Shaco was basically a stalker that had been stalking them for months even before the Halloween stunt. In fact, the stunt didn't stop the creeping at all. Shaco just kept stalking them both no matter what. For 2+ years, he tracked them all across the state till eventually, due to stress, Max broke up with Jeff. Max couldn't take a crazy guy like that, always watching them from the shadows every single day, so he bailed, leaving Jeff alone with no one to help beside his sister. What made the story terrifying to me was the sad ending. Max found out at some point in August both Jeff and his sister ended their lives together. Without Max to help through the hard times, Jeff and his sister couldn't take Shaco's madness much longer and ended their lives by hanging themselves. Max broke down crying by this point in the story. He is now trying to leave Texas by saving money due to a mixture of guilt and fear. The reason for this fear is because he got a Facebook message from an unknown account telling him, "I'll make you pay. I'll make you pay for leaving my Jeff alone. I'll make you pay." So now Max is just praying that Shaco doesn't find him before he leaves the state. I ended up buying him 3 shots that night and getting him an Uber home. I admit I'm not a good person, but I'm not pure evil. Not like him. So to whoever reads this, believe it or not, please stay safe. There are monsters lurking amongst us. And to you, Shaco, if me and my crew ever come across you, make no mistake, we aren't against beating up monsters like you, especially after the pain you put poor Jeff through, to his final moments. I'm a pretty big girl, not extremely obese, but chunky enough that it's obvious, and it's not due to diet. I have polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, which can cause issues with weight due to the pituitary gland releasing the wrong type of hormones. With this comes insulin resistance, which is like pre-diabetes. It's reversible, but not always effective. As such, in my 20s, I'm on a drug called metformin. Metformin, or glucophage, depending on what name you know it by, isn't an addictive substance. It's used to control high insulin, and I have to take it with my heaviest meals, lunch and supper, so I'm usually toting around this giant pill bottle full of white tablets. The reason why I do this is because I work part-time and attend university. I live in the dormitory of my university and have to take transit to work and back, with a bus switch downtown. Around the area where I have to switch my bus are numerous cafes and convenience stores. Needless to say, I've grabbed something to eat from there numerous times. And finally, I tend to dress goth or punk. My head's shaven on the side and I've got a few piercings. Mostly I'm left alone, but there have been times where some idiots decided to have a go at me, particularly on Friday nights. It was Friday, the 2nd of November, to put things into perspective. My instructor was ill, so class was canceled and I had an extra hour to get to work. I usually grab a quick deli sandwich and a coffee from a cafe, the closest to the bus stop, and stick it into my backpack so I can eat it on my break. This Friday, with extra time on my hands, I decided upon arriving at my stop to stay at the cafe. I go in, order my usual plain latte and turkey bacon wrap if you have to know, and sit down next to the window so I can keep an eye on the stop. I have my earbuds in and I'm listening to a podcast, just going through the motions. Once finishing my wrap, I unzip the front pocket of my backpack, fish out the bottle of pills, pop it, and wash it down with my latte. All at once, this guy just comes up to my table and motions for me to take my earbuds out. For a description, he's pretty tall, kind of burly, white as a sheet with his broom mustache, wearing clean civilian clothes. Nothing that set off my alarm bells. Being confused, I do so and he tells me, "Excuse me, miss, but what exactly are those?" He was talking about my pills. A thing with me is that I'm pretty confrontational when I feel threatened, so I said to him, "None of your business?" Then this guy pulls open his jacket, flashing me a police badge. Only, he did it so quickly that I couldn't make out the details, just the shape and nothing else. "I think it is. What are those, narcotics?" At this point, I'm in complete shock. The rational part of my brain is shut off because I'm so caught off guard by this random man, potentially a cop, looming over me. "No," is all I could get out. "That's so," he says and picks up my pill bottle. Also, if you know the medication, you know they put your full name on the label, as well as what it is. Before I can tell him to give it back, he puts it in his pocket and quickly goes, "You're right, I'm confiscating these. If you want to come with me downtown to discuss this further, I suggest we do so now, before I place you under arrest." Okay, so at this point, I'm half calling him, half unsure what to say or how to react. All I'm able to say is flat out, "No," like a moron. "Do you want to be placed under arrest?" "I'm a cop, miss, I can do that." And then he flashes out his pair of handcuffs. They're not the fluffy, kinky ones either you'd expect a fake cop to have. They're real and, as far as I can tell, metal. "I'd recommend you just follow me to my car so we can have a chat." Of course, my sense of rationality is still undermined by the sheer ridiculousness of this situation. So I end up just blurting out, "I'm not using drugs. Bad ones, that's medicine." He says this cliche, "Yeah, that's what they all say," and proceeds to reach for my arm. When he grabs it, my senses finally come to me and I pull back up against the window. "Give me back my medication," I yell, loud enough to get attention from the patrons and staff. "Miss, I'm asking you to come quietly," he says along those lines. I keep my mouth running. "That's my medication for diabetes and I need it. It says so on the bottle. If you're a cop, give me my pills back and call for backup. Better yet," I proceed to grab my phone, "I'll call the cops here because there's been a mistake." That got him angry. He says something along the lines of, "You're resisting arrest," and tries to grab my arm again. At this point, I'm dialing 911 and one of the baristas is coming out from behind the counter. He asks this guy, "What are you doing?" It finally scares the creep, and he takes off. Granted, with my medication in his pocket. I speak to the dispatcher and the real cops show up within minutes. I speak to the cops and explain what happened. The barista also tells them that this guy has been sitting in the cafe for over an hour before I showed up, but hadn't been bothering other customers, just me apparently. Cops took surveillance from the security cameras, though of course there's none pointing out into the road. I actually had to go to the station to file a report because, yup, there were no undercover narc cops in that area that day. So, 100% wasn't an actual one. I suspected as much, but in our society, you're inclined to believe and trust in authority figures. These days, not so much, but disobeying them isn't in our programming usually. It really isn't in mine either, but the whole thing was fishy from the get-go. Considering, of course, it was my metformin he took, and I had to replace the entire 3-month bottle and go several hours between doses, something that puts me at risk for hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. I am, of course, quite angry at this idiot still, but I'll admit I'm also fully aware and freaked out that I was in a whole lot of danger too. It's not common where I live, but human trafficking is a thing, and the fact that this guy wanted me, a lone female who looks the type to use some kind of illegal substance, to go with him alone gets to me. What if my common sense didn't kick in, or the barista hadn't done something? The people around us sure didn't pull a "what would you do" and come to my rescue. The biggest thing that's freaky is that not only has this guy not been caught yet, but my pills were later recovered. The bottle was found a few blocks away, still half full, by eyeballing it, which confirms the cop theory that he wasn't some desperate junkie or guy trying to rob me. He wouldn't have dumped the pills if he wanted to sell them. So they dubbed this an attempted abduction due to his aggressiveness to get me to go with him. Before anyone asks, no, I can't take them. Not that I could anyway. The cops are keeping the bottle for evidence because fingerprints exist. I've been keeping my eyes out in case fake cop comes wandering onto my campus, and I did switch my bus route. I'm taking the long way, which I don't enjoy, but until they catch the creep, that's the way it's gotta be, unfortunately. Otherwise, so far I've gotten no creepy phone calls, no random people texting me, no cryptic messages on my social media platforms, nothing. If this guy is smart, he wouldn't even try anyways. I'm really hoping he's smart for my own sanity. I'm in my early 20s. I work overnights at a group home for autistic children. There were 3 boys living in the house. My job was to come in. If they weren't asleep when I got there, I would get them to sleep. I would do some paperwork and do most of the cleaning. Then in the morning, I would wake them up, get them ready for school, make breakfast, and tell the morning person about anything that might have happened overnight, or that the afternoon or evening person told me about what had happened the previous day. All told, it was an easy job. I loved being with the boys when they were awake, but largely had 5 to 6 hours to do 2 hours worth of work. So that was 3 to 4 hours where all I had to do was stay awake and hope that the boys slept through the night. Typically, I spent that time chatting online or watching TV on my laptop or reading. However, sometimes things did get a bit creepy. There would be times throughout the day where I would be talking to one of the boys, getting him dressed, and he would stop what he was doing and just stare over my shoulder. I'm pretty short for a guy, only 5'7", so if someone is standing behind me, they're pretty easy to see. Obviously, there would be no one behind me or I would have mentioned it. There were a few times where one of the boys would actually point up toward the ceiling and say, "Who's that? Who's she?" I think those moments were the second scariest thing for me. Other times, I could hear walking down in the basement. The office was in the basement and the door was kept locked so the boys wouldn't go down there. Or times where I would hear the door to the laundry room slam. Sometimes when I worked mornings after the boys had left for school, I could hear children laughing in the house, and other staff had mentioned hearing it too. The scariest moment in the house for me was a night shift. I was laying on the couch in the living room reading. The couch was against the wall and had a chair directly next to it so that they were touching, and the chair was right next to the doorway in the kitchen. The kitchen led to the hallway that led to the bathroom and the boys' room. So I was laying on the couch with my head closest to the hallway to better hear if the boys got up. You had to react quickly if they did, or you might have a big mess on your hands. When I heard footsteps. Now the boys who were down the hall were small boys and both needed help getting their shoes on, but these were heavy footsteps and they sounded like someone wearing heavy boots. I froze. The steps came down the hall, into the kitchen, and into the living room. Then I heard the air leaving the cushion on the chair that was literally 6 inches away from the back of my head, as if someone had just sat down. I took a deep breath and turned around. No one was there. I was freaked out, but I had a job to do. And honestly, if I was mistaken about the direction or placement of those footsteps, and someone was in one of the boys' room, I would rather face them than let the boys get hurt. So knowing where I heard the footsteps, I walked back just to be sure. I look in on the boys. They're all asleep. I didn't get much more reading done that night, but I think that's the cleanest the house has ever been. Ever since I can remember, I've had what I assume to be a dark entity attached to or following me. I call it the Shadow Man because it looks like a very dark silhouette of a tall man that appears to me, usually when I am going through a rough time in my life. Now, I think this is important to note that the entity appears to me mostly at night, but also during the day, usually when I am alone. But I must mention that I do not suffer from sleep paralysis, have never hallucinated, except after surgery, have never taken hallucinogenic drugs, etc., and I have seen it in multiple houses I've lived in, and it's been a part of my earliest memories. I usually see the shadow man at night, sometimes walking with a jolt, and it is at the foot of my bed just standing over me. When I was young, my mother used to tell me to command it to go away, but ever since I turned 12, that hasn't worked. When I was 12, I was in my bed at my dad's house when I saw it manifest through my sliding closet door that was a mirror. It started as a mist, and the color slowly became darker, and it seemed to take a more three-dimensional shape. I was terrified and hid under the covers with my eyes shut tight and felt the corner of my bed pressed down with an unseen weight that I moved as far away from as I could. I was too afraid to say anything aloud, but in my head I was shouting, "Get out! Leave me alone," as loud as I could possibly think. Eventually, I fell asleep and didn't see it again for another few months. When I was 15, I started dating my current boyfriend. He is a skeptic and always has been, and has never believed my stories of the Shadow Man. When I was 18, we got an apartment together, and the first time I saw the Shadow Man there, I was home alone and called him, hysterically crying because the Shadow Man moved towards me at warp-like speed, and I dropped to the floor and closed my eyes, crying for it to go away. My boyfriend thought it was a ploy to get him to come home early from work, and he just told me to get into bed and try to take a nap until we got home at about 3 p.m. This happened at about 12 in the afternoon. After much begging and pleading on my end, we eventually got a dog because it would make me feel safer. When I was 20, I was in the kitchen downstairs making dinner with my dog by my side, and I got the feeling of static electricity on the back of my neck that I always got before I saw the Shadow Man. And I turned to see it in the dining room, and I looked down, and my dog's hackles were raised, and I called for my boyfriend, scared but determined to make him believe me. He came down the stairs, and by this point my dog was growling and barking, something very unusual for him, as we have heard him bark only a handful of times, and he has only ever growled 2 other times when I felt I was in danger, but those are stories for another time. And my boyfriend said he saw the air almost shimmer where my dog and I saw the Shadow Man standing, and it just faded out of sight when my boyfriend got to me. But at least he believes me now. I'm so grateful to my dog for making enough of a scene for my boyfriend to come down, because now I'm taken seriously, and at least I'm not alone in this. I remember when I was 13 years old. We were living in Florida in the suburbs of Orlando. We have since moved up to Oklahoma to get back in touch with God, as my grandpa pastors a pretty big church there in Tulsa. Anyway, I played in a soccer program called Upward. I loved every second of it, especially playing with my best friend at the time, Brandon. We'd goof off most of the time, and neither of us were too good at the sport, but we both loved it. Now some explanation. Brandon has a moderate case of autism. His was a bit worse than mine, however, and he'd often overreact to small situations and go off in his own little world. Normal stuff. He was really into Sonic.exe and Slender Man, all things horror. His parents didn't know how to deal with him properly. I imagine this is why Brandon did what he did on this particular night, or it could have been his obsession with things of its nature. Oh, also, we're both homeschooled, so we did school whenever we wanted. So Brandon and I bugged his mom about letting me stay the night after a successful soccer game one night. She said it was okay with her. Then Brandon suggested a week. She said no and instead suggested 3 days. I agreed on that, and Brandon did too. My parents knew them at this point and also agreed. It was a done deal. I packed up and headed over there. When I was dropped off at the house, Brandon greeted me. He talked about what we were going to do, almost none of which we did, and we walked to his bedroom. We instead talked about random things, and his older sister, who was 15, joined us later that night. We all went to bed late at night. The next day came and we woke up pretty late. That is, Ash, Brandon's sister, and I did. Brandon was nowhere to be found. We decided not to worry about it and talk to each other instead. About half an hour passed and I decided we needed to find Brandon. Ash went to her bedroom instead. I walked around the house and, with no luck, decided to look outside. Immediately my senses were attacked by a foul, sour, stinging odor, as if the sources were right next to me. I remember recoiling in surprise. I got away from whatever the smell was, going toward the lake they lived on. I saw Brandon walking along the shore, holding something red and brown in his arms. It looked like a towel. It was about as long as his forearm. I faintly heard him singing something to himself as he walked. I silently made my way over to him, hoping he wouldn't hear me. I wanted to try and scare him, not thinking at all about what he was holding. He went toward the small kayak house that they had for, you guessed it, kayaking. I figured the perfect time to attack would be when he walked in there, where it was dark. I smiled and dashed behind a tree to wait for him to enter. Brandon stopped right outside the door and locked it in both of his hands in front of himself. He lifted it to his side, and I got a good view of the carcass of a rabbit. My eyes opened so wide in shock I couldn't blink. He started slamming it against the tin build of the shack, screaming. He opened the door and used the edge of the door where the doorknob was and slammed the rabbit's spine into it. A sickening snap was heard and I felt dizzy. I walked back to the house and entered it, and I began crying. It scared me so badly that I was bawling. I soon gathered myself and decided against saying anything about it to anyone because I truly thought no one would believe me. Brandon came in later on and we hung out as usual with the exception of my newfound knowledge. Night fell and we all talked and went to bed a little earlier this time so we'd wake up later and have more day to burn. Brandon wanted to show me something first though and got me out of bed. We walked outside on his back porch and the same smell from earlier that day stung my senses. I remember this night vividly. "Ugh, what is that smell, dude?" I asked, cupping my hands over my nose and mouth. He walked over to a small box with holes poked in it, opened it, and picked something up out of it, facing away from me. He turned around excitedly and held out what he picked up. "This," he said, smiling. It was an extremely skinny rabbit, red stains on its brown fur. It smelled horrific. "Ew, dude, what is that?" I shouted, jumping back. It had things moving in its fur. Its eyeballs were sunk into its skull almost to the point that they had fallen out of the sockets. Brandon had a sad look on his face. "What?" he asked curiously. "What do you mean, what?" I shouted angrily at him. "I killed it. Look at what's happening to it. It's cool, right?" he asked me. "No, you're a monster," I yelled at him. His face completely went blank after that. "I'll kill you next." My parents pulled up after I'd gotten Brandon's mom up and asked her if I could go home. I told her I was homesick. I know, I probably should have mentioned the threat, but the only thing I wanted to do was get out of there. I told my parents while we were driving home, who in turn told his parents. I really haven't seen him since then. Like I said, we moved up to Oklahoma soon afterward for unrelated reasons. I used to live out in the country in Manitoba, Canada. Like real boonies, you had to bike or drive to go anywhere aside from a railroad-side ice cream parlor. At night, it would get pretty dark too. With my mother and stepdad, we had 3 small dogs and a cat. I was often left in charge of all of them. I was kind of resentful for all the work on top of the schooling and homework, but I loved the animals, so I couldn't blame them too much. Unless they made a huge mess, then I'd be pretty ticked, but that's not entirely relevant. What is that I would routinely take them all out before going to bed, and I would go to bed very, very late at night like any 14-year-old with such lax parenting. Emma, Lady, and my dog Carmelita would usually stay in the front yard, which was a vast acreage of flat land with a tiny ditch. It was easy to see the small dogs and call them back in. Sometimes Emma would wander. My mother's Cairn Terrier had a bit of a rebellious side to her, but it wasn't her who took off this night. It was Lady, the Cocker Spaniel. She was a protective and watchful eye while the others were mostly divas. Frustrated, I ran off after her around to the back of the house, which is a steep slope toward a waterbed that is an offshoot of the Red River. What I saw slowly sprawling across the slope still gives me chills. These things were about chest height to me and 25 feet away. Pale tan or gray mostly. No tails, no muzzles, but on all fours with long legs that were longer in the front. They turned their almost featureless faces up to us at the top of the slope. Their eyes were large and glowed in the faint back porch lights like big marbles. Luckily, Lady had frozen at the top with me, her hackles raised like a hyena. The creatures were still walking, but were bobbing their heads about, looking at us. I grabbed the dog by crouching quickly, frightened we'd be attacked, and bolted around the side to the front again, calling for the others to come inside. Emma and Carmelita were already sitting at the door waiting for us. I guess they'd figured it was too chilly for them to stay out so long, but truthfully, my out-of-shape self was boiling from the adrenaline. I refused to take them out after dark after that, which unfortunately resulted in plenty of messes I had to clean up. I would occasionally see those strange things crossing our backyard after that. They'd only look up at my house if I had the lights on and was obviously moving in clear view. Another night I woke up, radio flashing 1 a.m. or something close to that. I wasn't sure why I woke up at that time until I realized I wasn't alone. I sleep in the basement at that time. My windows overlook the backyard, but only slightly. It was located under the back porch, which was able to be walked under if you simply stooped a bit. One of those things with pale skin and huge green eyes lowered its head as it looked through my window. I froze. I'm not sure if I moved at all after waking up. It sort of bobbed its head around for a brief time only and then quickly bolted off as if something had frightened it. To this day I have no idea what they were. They almost acted like deer, but they hardly look like them. Their bodies looked closer to misshapen dogs or humans. Their faces were hard to see, but from what I could tell they had no muzzles and very big eyes. I tried looking up what cryptids or myths were native to where I live, but everything just sort of points to Wendigo or skinwalkers, and I'm not entirely sold on either. I saw them too frequently for them to be a random misinterpretation of another animal, and aside from simple distance making it hard to discern their faces, they stuck around long enough for me to get a really good look at their form. So what was I seeing out there? I grew up in a Reformed Jewish household. For those who don't know what that is, basically it means we want to feed the world and respect traditions but aren't really religious. Picture the typical grandma when you come in, and of course she wants to feed you. Has to be thought in a stereotypical Yiddish grandma voice. "You're so skinny. What? You never eat. Sit, have some matzo ball soup, chicken. I'm making brisket for dinner. Want some candy? Gosh, don't your mothers feed you?" But multiply that by 10. I love my family and have always had a sensitivity to vibes my mom says I got from my great-great-grandmother, who was a Sephardic Jewish gypsy. While my mom and biological dad divorced, I no longer recognize him as my father, since no man should treat his child the way he treated me growing up, and we'll leave it at that. So I guess to clarify, I love my mother's side of the family. My biological dad would take me to his hometown growing up and let his parents watch me as he drank the day away. This was fine as I had friends in his neighborhood and they helped me learn to surf, fish, and more. When I was 8 years old, my pop-pop had passed away, as had my stepmother's mom. She was a rad older lady, Jewish too, and always looked out for me on trips, Grandma S. My biological dad had inherited his parents' home and was now helping care for my grandma, my pop-pop's wife, Grandma J, and by help I mean his sister cared for his mother and he drank and did yard work. It was strange being in the house without him and his cigars and my grandma's voice singing through the kitchen. "Bobola, you hungry? Shayna Poonam, wanna watch Disney movies with me?" It was silent, except for my aunt fussing over my Grandma J, who had Parkinson's and dementia. Poor woman. I wish she and I had been closer growing up, but she was always suffering from early onset dementia and was confused so often I found it best to sit with her but leave her be. So my next-door neighbor, Sammy, was my age, and she was a dead ringer for Rocket Girl from Rocket Power, the TV show from Nickelodeon like mid-90s to 2000. She asked if I'd bring my dad longboards and meet her at the beach and we'd catch the small waves and ride the line. This was and is Florida, and we lived right on the beach, so like a 5 to 10 minute walk with my little legs. I agreed, and with my little 8-year-old arms and legs, this was a big undertaking by myself. Keep in mind, this is the 90s. So long as we were vocal where we went and were back in a few hours, we were fine. So I'm trying to maneuver this huge board about 8 foot 7 inches and my board 7 foot 10 inches across a busy intersection across the street to the beach. I put my board down and press the crosswalk button, then pick up my dad's board and put it on my shoulder and smushed it against my head as I basically used my head as a prop. Fiberglass at the age was heavy. This was obstructing my view of oncoming traffic to my left. I saw the pedestrian walkway light change green, and I made my way to cross the street. This is where it gets interesting. As soon as my little sandal touched the road, I felt a strong hand pull me back from the road onto my butt as a huge red SUV came speeding through the red light and most certainly would have meant severe, possibly life-threatening injuries. My mouth gaped open wide as I saw it zoom past, horn blaring presumably at me, like I was the crazy one. I sat up, pulling my board to my feet, quickly glancing for damage. As I dusted myself off to thank whomever just saved my life, I heard a very familiar voice. "You need to be careful, Bobola." I recognized the voice and the red hair as she disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. Her perfume that usually made my nose crinkle due to how overwhelming it was, now wafted and hung in the air like a goodbye. I was speechless. How could this have happened? I grabbed the boards and carefully crossed the street. 1 or 2 patrons on the other side asking me if I was okay from their seats at the beachside dive bar. I nodded and sniffled as I was too overwhelmed at my young age and I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers. I see Sammy making a sand kingdom off in the distance as my sore legs wobbled her way. She was a sweet girl and could tell I was distressed. "Hey, are you okay?" She noticed I was banged up a bit. "You have scrapes on your legs. Come on, let's wash them off in the ocean." She took me slightly by the hand and let the waves lick my legs and the salt sting and clean my scrapes. "Dude, you okay now?" she whispered as she had never seen me cry before, except the time I aided skateboarding, but I had busted up my chin and blood dripping off my face was freaking me out. "Yeah," I squeaked out. "Do you still want to surf?" she asked concerned. "Yeah." So we paddled out in the lineup where I just laid on my board and quietly cried to myself. I caught a few bumps in, and after 2 hours I told Sammy it was time for me to go. I sat in my grandparents' house, the incident replaying in my head over and over. The weekend went by in a blur, and I was back home with my mom in our shoebox of a house we had after the divorce. "Okay," my mom interrupted, never-ending thoughts. "You are way too quiet. What happened? Did your dad do something?" she prodded. I turned and looked at her on our violet leather couch and let out a sigh I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Mommy, what happens, when you die?" I asked in a whisper. She looked shocked. I mean, what parent wouldn't when their child is asking about death? "What do you mean? Why are you asking this?" She now moved closer, moving my bangs from my eyes, looking so concerned. I sighed again, debating whether to tell her what happened. "Mom," I tried again, "are there such things as ghosts?" I looked her in the eyes, searching for an answer. She sighed and said, "I don't know," she said, pulling me close, arm around me and settling in on the couch. She told me her story. "But when I was out of college, I was in New York working as the regional manager for J&M, and it was freezing cold. Snow clung to everything. It was sleeting and the sidewalks turned to ice skating rinks." She chuckled to herself. I must have looked so confused as she continued with, "Anyways, I had 6 to 7 white boxes of clothes stacked to bring to retail location just about 3 blocks down from the main office. I do this to check in and keep morale high. If I can trudge through the snow, you can trudge through your shifts and meet sales goals, type thing. Mind you,
I've made this walk countless times in my boots and heels with boxes stacked 10 high. The weather was making it hard to see, though, and the sleet was stinging my face, not to mention the boxes impaired my view. So, I went across the street.
My heart stopped as my encounter played again in my head.
And as I went across, I heard a voice I was so familiar with say, "Don't cross, Shanapunam, wait." I felt your great-grandma Esther. She was there. I was so stunned I took a few steps back and saw a taxi come zooming past, then hit a patch of ice and nailed the light post not even 10 steps to my right. I looked all around, baby. I didn't see her. And how could I? She had passed that month. I dropped the boxes and checked on the driver and called 911. I was very shaken up.
She paused, her own confusion playing across her features, and probably to keep from rambling.
So to answer your question, I don't know what happens when we die. I wouldn't say I believe in ghosts, but I do believe in guardian angels and spirits. They are always watching over you to protect you and keep you safe, she said. She did again ask why I had asked, but I didn't tell her. To this day, I haven't told her my experience. I am certain she'll think I'm making it up to match her story or something. I wasn't a very honest child. After all, I hid my father's drinking and abusive nature from her. Maybe now she'd believe me, but it's been so long. But it does give me such peace to know that our loved ones are never really gone. They're always watching over us. So I believe in the paranormal ghosts, spirits, and the like. But I believe over everything else, we have guardian spirits watching over us. My name is Lydia. I'm a 19-year-old female. I live with my dad on the weekends, but I live at school during the week. That isn't really relevant to what I'm about to tell you, but I thought I'd tell you where I stand. This occurred last July. I remember this time frame so well because it happened the day after I saw Panic at the Disco at MSG. The day after the concert, so the 25th I think, I was playing Animal Crossing at my dad's house. He wasn't home, so I was the only one in the house other than the cat. I heard a knock at the door. It was later in the afternoon, maybe about 6 p.m., so I started to walk towards the door, not thinking twice about it. My dad's house has a large, one-way window next to the door, so I was able to see who was outside. I assumed it was a kid from the neighborhood, so I opened the door. It was a boy. He looked a little lost, so I asked him if he needed anything. He said no and asked if he could come inside. I asked why, and he just shrugged and stood there with a blank expression. I was confused by this and was torn on what to do. This boy was a child, only about 6 years old. I then remembered the whole stranger danger thing, even though it was a child and I'm a 19-year-old female. The boy asked if he could come in again, so I asked, "Why do you want to come in?" He gave me an answer and it was kind of unsettling. He said something along the lines of, "My parents will come looking for me soon." I was confused and thought this boy was just terrified to be on his own. I then looked at his eyes for whatever reason, and the eye sockets were empty or black, I couldn't tell. My body began to speak almost on its own, and long story short, I ended up letting him in. I couldn't stop myself. It was almost like pressure or something was forcing me to say it, even though I knew it felt so unlike me, as I'm a pretty anxious person around new people, never mind random children who show up to your house. When he came inside, he sat on the chair in the entryway. I was uncomfortable and I could tell that this child did not want to speak at all. I opened my DS to resume the game and it froze. I tried to turn it off and back on without saving my progress and it wouldn't even do that. I brushed that off as a coincidence and just me being paranoid. After what felt like eons, the child stood up and said, "They're here." He got up and walked out the door. I watched him get into the car, and as he was leaving, my dad was driving in front of our house to pull into the driveway. My dad got inside and asked who that boy was. I responded with the whole story, minus the black eyes and DS part, cause my dad's a skeptic about this kind of stuff. I then made up that I called the boy's parents to come and pick him up. That was obviously a lie. I told my friend about this, and she said that I probably had an experience with the black-eyed children. I'm no paranormal expert, but this felt very unhuman-like. I don't know what the children's parents were either. I asked my dad, and he didn't see them or anyone driving the car. He blamed it on the tinted windows, but I'm not sure. I couldn't see anything either. With all of that being said, I'm not sure what the child actually was. I haven't had any strange dreams or had any medical problems, and I hope to keep it that way. I grew up in a haunted house. No big deal, but it was built in the early 1800s as an ice house, and like many ice houses of the time, it was used to store dead bodies during the winter months, particularly when the ground would freeze hard. Then when coal was struck and the power company ate up as much land as they could, it turned into a coal dump. The attic was built enormously and could have easily been 2 stories high, and still room for all my father's pack rat crap. It had 2 huge roll-up garage doors about 8 feet from the ceiling of the apartment, which would make a solid 19-foot fall. The floor was jacked up a foot or 2 from the bedrock. I like to joke that I lived in a bomb shelter. On one of the timbers of the apartment walls had 1960 written on it. It had a strange layout where my older brother would have to pass through my room. This caused a whole other bucket of stories. I had always been afraid of the closet in that room. It still gives me a phobia to this day. My brother would often tell me horrible things to keep me in the bed at night. Now that that's out of the way, I'll start with a little girl who had died of yellow fever. I was able to find her obituary at the library. They even had her post-mortem pictures. She is the one that I would say has been there the longest. I was never afraid of her. I was a lonely child because of the huge age gap of my siblings. She wouldn't be what I would call an imaginary friend either. She came at clear times of the day, and I actually miss her. At night she would try to lay down in bed with you. She would first sit, like trying to ease into the bed, instead of just flopping into the bed. Hear her breath just a few moments of fully laying down. She would play with certain toys, especially when new people came around. Girlfriends, boyfriends, best friends, and sleepover parties all fell victim to the little girl that just wants someone to cuddle at night. I assume she was stored in the ice house due to winter. The coal miner. He died in that house when a truckload of coal had been dumped accidentally, basically burying him alive in a dusty, unwashed coal. He died of collapsed lungs. No pictures in the obituary, but he stayed in the attic, just over the master bedroom. He didn't wear a shirt, only overalls that had been covered in coal. He himself just as dark as carbon, with his eyes and mouths rubbed by a clean handkerchief. Red like a sunburn under the dust on his face. He wasn't a nice guy, but he wasn't a mean one either. Only confusing and annoying at times with his loud boots around 3 a.m. The last thing that lived in my house is the star of this show. This man-shaped being was not a good spirit in the slightest. In fact, I really don't think it was a spirit at all. Something horrid and unworldly under the cloak of a normal shadow man. It had substance and depth at times, but like the girl and the coal miner, it too would come out during special events. My parents had a toxic marriage for the better part of my life. Knowing that my mother had been having an affair for 6 years longer than my own life, I understood why. They would have screaming matches about the food my mom cooked, the stain on the shirt, the taste of the tea, money, bills, etc. When left in the care of my brother, who was more than old enough to be a responsible older brother, he would beat me to near unconsciousness when I bugged him a little too long, which caused me to just curl back up to my room under the bed, my sanctuary and sometimes the little girl's meeting place. Only her energy, holding a hand or moving a toy. When I grew up a little and had thoughts that are hard for even adults to process, the earliest memory was when I was searching the toy box of hand-me-downs that was kept in my bedroom closet. My mom had just left the house, then my dad left, after a huge fight, of course. The night before my brother locked me outside in the cold, he turned out the porch light, cackled like a hyena, then went to the other room. I broke through the glass that was closest to the doorknob by accident after beating a little too hard in fear and anger about staying outside for God knows how long. I panicked about how cut up my hand was, and I was finally led into the house, where I was tortured further with rubbing alcohol on my glass-filled fist. I screamed more about that than the initial cuts. I was threatened by my brother. Next time it would be worse. Sadly, a promise he kept. The spirit yanked back the clothes that hung over the toy box and tilted an egg-shaped head toward me. It examined me like a bug, up, then down, and over again. I just held tight to my littlest pet shop or pound puppy I had been searching for, looking at him in wonder, tinged with shock and fear. The door shut, closing me in the closet. Fear started to increase. But who did I fear more? My brother. I only stayed with my eyes locked on the man. He snapped and popped with his movements, like arthritis had been building up for an eternity. He moved back into the clothes and straightened himself, adjusting. Popcorn in the microwave. When I let out a squeak and started to reach for the doorknob, it only looked hard at me for a moment, then slammed the clothes back together with a snap. Naturally, I was slightly relieved, but I still went for the door. The knob didn't budge. Don't panic. Both hands. Still no turn, in full panic mode. I screamed and thumped myself against the door, smashing my hand in the process. My final heave, I wound up tumbling out to my brother with his cackling laugh. It gave me carpet burn down my face. The reason I panicked so hard, hurt myself, and was willing to break my shoulder to get out of that closet was that thing. It started growling. It stretched up towards the ceiling and was now leaning over the rack of clothes, leering down on me. It felt like its darkness was going to swallow me. This actually became a go-to for my brother too, but I disarmed him by not coming unglued. This came to an end when my mother came to wake me up for school and found me asleep in the toy box. She was on the verge of grounding me, which consisted of no four-wheeler or video games. In short, I ratted on him. But that closet scared me more when I was out of it. The doorknob had this jingle from being loose. The jingle would come and then the door would break open with force, but not slam. The shadow would ease out from the door and the closet would be left open a crack. I saw this twice as a preteen and once as a teenager. It would slink itself into my brother's room where he was probably tripping balls. One night I heard him jerk his PlayStation controller out of the port and slam it into the wall that faced my room. Following was a muffled cussing, then him coming out of his lit bedroom, crotch of his pants covered in pee. I sat up once he was out of my room and clasped my hand over my mouth to keep him from hearing my laughing. This small victory came to an abrupt resolution when I saw the shadow glide back to my closet, then the door closed with a jingle. I haven't asked my sister what does the bad one mean because I'm scared of the response. I haven't asked my brother because we have never willingly communicated with each other until recently when we agreed my sister was the favorite. Do you think my brother's teasing was just teasing, or does he still have to make sure his closet door is completely shut before bed too? I live in a rural area in New England, and nothing out here really bothers me. I've seen black bears, coyotes, and have become used to the wildlife in the area by living out here for 17 years. But whenever you get used to something, Mother Nature always tends to mess it up. It was a warm summer day in July, and I decided to take my horse, Cheyenne, down a forested trail on my grandparents' property. We've completed this trail many times with no issues, so I thought nothing of it at the time. I tacked up and started down the trail in mid-afternoon, the heat and flies already getting to my horse and I. When trail riding, you tend to lose track of time. You study the forest and listen to the noises all around you, and that's what I did. As we carried on down the trail, I noticed my mare became increasingly nervous and reluctant to move forward. I encouraged her the best I could, but I started to notice a change in the forest. It was like a mood swing. The forest noises seemed to dim, which put me on edge. Up ahead of us was a sharp wooded corner, so I couldn't see what was up ahead. The logical side of me was screaming. I've listened to scary narrations. This simply wasn't a good situation. The stubborn side of me, however, was encouraged around the corner, and with my horse on edge, I did. The forest was now silent, and dread consumed me, but I rounded the corner. In front of me was a decently dressed man in the middle of the trail, but he just seemed off. His motions were almost mechanical, I dare say robotic. He lurched backwards. He didn't jump back. It was like something pulled his body back. It was almost like it wanted to act surprised or shocked that I was there. It just didn't look natural. It looked like a puppet. At that moment, my mind was screaming. No one was supposed to be out there. No one should be out there. This was private property in the middle of nowhere. This trail wasn't even connected or near to main roads. Strangers couldn't access it. I didn't even get a good look at his face. I could feel myself avoiding looking at it, as if even the thought of it unnerved me. His clothing, as I recall, just seemed average, nothing special, but his presence made me physically sick. I've never had so much dread come over me. A person shouldn't enable that much fear into someone. As if my horse sensed my dread, she turned quickly around and bolted back down the trail as if spooked herself, and we headed back to the barn. As I got to the end of the trail and saw the barn, I felt everything lift. The forest noises came back and most of the fear drifted away. I could finally breathe. I never untacked a horse that quickly in my life. I had to walk past the trail to make it to my grandparents' house, and I dreaded it. I got on the phone with my mom as I made my way down the dirt road to the house. I had boasted to her about how I saw a deer on the trail, trying not to make my voice crack as I walked past it. Too afraid to tell the truth of what I saw or even manage a glance back at it. Once I passed the trail, I sprinted the rest of the way, almost like an invisible boogeyman was behind me. I don't fear the woods. I don't fear people. But that man, or whatever it was, terrified me. He said nothing, but still could enable so much instinctive dread and fear into me. My horse sensed it. A person has never spooked her, but that thing did. I don't know what that was, but the motions were not human. Please, everyone be careful in the woods, and never get too comfortable. That's when the strangest encounters happen. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, our Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured here on the channel. And join my Discord to interact with me and other great people directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merchandise on Spreadshirt, just in time for the holidays. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.